Hi, my name is Bo. I'm one of the employees at Imperial Outpost Games, and today we're going to paint a Manticore. This Manticore is provided by Wizkid's Take and Paint event. It is from Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures line, Wave 12, and it is intended for tabletop play in Dungeons & Dragons. Sorry about the glare. In Dungeons & Dragons, but can be used in whatever RPG setting that suits your gaming needs. We will have, I believe, 10 or 11 for sale starting today, and they are first come, first serve. We sadly cannot hold any to be picked up later. In the kit, you are provided the Manticore, obviously, along with 12 Vallejo paints, selected specifically for this model, 2 brushes, a water pot, and the model comes primed in Vallejo Gray. So for starters, I always shade my projects in a zenithal highlight. This is where the bottom of the model is shaded in a darker color, and the top is a brighter color, as if the sun were beating down on the model from high noon, or the zenith, hence the phrase. I used an airbrush to get this effect to speed things up, but you can use a spray can primer or shade by hand, or of course you can leave it as is because it comes primed already after all. Alright, so first thing I'll do is block out the mass areas of the model in paint, namely the body and wings. I find it easier to paint the bigger sections first before I start honing in on the smaller details. And to do this, I'm actually going to ignore the paints provided for now and use some washes and contrast paints, letting the zenithal highlight do the work for me. This will also work with the pre-primed model in the kit, as the washes will create the shadows and definitions of the anatomy so you can pick out details later. This is mostly to lay down the tones of the model. So first off, I'm going to grab this Grunt of Fur. It's contrast paint from Citadel. I'm also going to mix that with a bit of Agrax Earthshade because Grunt of Fur has a pretty strong pigment, and I want a more tawny lion fur coat. So let me grab the paint here. There we go. Yep. So grab some paint, get it on my wet palette here. I don't always use a wet palette. For this, I'm giving you guys a benefit. I like to also just blend it directly on the model, which I guess is not exactly as popular or as typical as one might see in other feeds. I'm also going to cut it with a little bit of Lamian medium, so that it doesn't leave such a strong tone on the model. So got that ready. So let's start with let's go with the leg right here. So you can see the washes are trying to leave the grain of the fur alone and just seep into these crevices here. And that's partly because of the wash, and that's partly because of the Lamian medium. The fact that the pigment isn't all that strong is actually mostly due to the Lamian medium. So, get all this here. And I'm trying to do it from the top down, because the washes naturally want to flow with gravity. And so I want the shadows to be the underside, so I want the washes to flow down into the crevices to do that. So if I was holding it up this way, then everything would start condensing here in this area instead of down below, and that's where I want the shadows to be. So always try and be mindful of where the paint is going to go and where it's going to dry, particularly with washes. So just lay this in, and we'll move on to the next color. Okay, so we've gotten that down. So while that is drying, you can see there's going to be some pockets here that are not drying as well, so you want to scoop that up with your brush sometime when they're pocketing like that. But while that's drying, I'm going to keep going, start in a different area. I'm going to take Citadel Contrast Skeleton Horde, and a little bit of Lamian Medium. And what I'm going to do is, I really wanted the mane to be kind of creamy looking, and the Zenithal kind of started that, but I really want to get those shadows in there that the airbrush might have taken away. So I'm just gonna use this Skeleton Horde washed down into this crevices here. I'll need to go back in afterwards and re-highlight some of the mane just to make it look more like a white mane rather than, what is this, a khaki mane, I guess. Now, see down here, the Lamian Medium isn't making it dark enough, so I'm just going to go straight from the pot. Because down here is where those shadows rest, and I really want that to hit home. So I'm going to really fill it in here with the contrast medium. Alright, so gonna finish this off. When I come back, both the mane and the body will be dry. Alright, so we've got the mane painted up, we've got the body painted up. Oh, forgot the tail. I'll go back and get that. But they're still not quite dry, so we're gonna keep going, because that is the sort of the curse with washes. They take a little bit longer to dry, and I'm noticing I'm getting some pooling right here, so I'm going to sop that up with this brush. I'll just wipe it off here. Now's where things get a little bit interesting. As I said, I looked at a lot of reference photos, and even though for the most part people keep their Manticore sort of reddish and brownish, and as you can see from the offered paint palette that they provide, that's sort of what they're leaning towards. But I saw some reference photos that really struck with me that had the wings sort of like this dark bluish black, so I thought I would give that a try. So I've got some Leviathan blue here, and it's gonna look pretty bright at first, so I'm gonna tone that down later, but for now I'm just gonna block that in. Now I avoided the arms here. I haven't touched on those. I'm gonna shade those with the Leviathan blue, and then I'm gonna go back and sort of give them a little bit of a flesh tone as a highlight, and that is pretty thick, so I'm gonna smooth that out with the Lamian medium there. Now I'm also running it over the skin tone here to sort of blend those two colors later. As you'll see, I'm wanting to blend the black into the skin tone, and that's going to happen right here on the arm. So that's going to be where I'm going to pay most attention to as far as smoothing those colors out. And I will finish this up and move on to the next. So now the wings are dry. I went ahead and doubled up the Leviathan blue and some Gorgrunta fur and made the, what do you call these, the bony protrusions for the wings, made those a little darker. And I also helped blend it in down through the arm. I'm going to actually adjust that later on, but for now I'm going to leave that dark. I also worked on the tail and added a little bit of green in here, and I'll show you why later. I plan on making these spines a little bit poisonous looking, like they're dripping with poison, obviously. So just getting that green hint in there is going to help with that effect. So now that everything's dry, I'm going to start doing some dry brushing to get those values back in there and highlighting those shadows a bit more. So I grabbed some Slanesh Gray and some Storm Vermin Fur, and I'm going to use that on the wings. So I obviously can't do that on the wet palette because I need a dry brush. So I've got a piece of paper towel here, and I'm going to mix the two together because I want it to be sort of a neutral tone with the Stormbringer fur, but I also want a little bit of flesh tone in it. But since I want that blue tone to remain, I'm going with the Slanesh gray, and that sort of gives me this almost like, I don't know, dingy lavender palette. So I'm just going to go really soft on the wings here. And it might get a little bright, and that's okay. I plan on using a very, very thinned down layer of wash later. This is just mostly to get in some more flesh values back into the wings, getting rid of like that saturated blue, because as good as I had hoped Leviathan blue to be, it was still a little bit too saturated. So this is both going to lessen that and punch up those values. Like you see the veins here are starting to show through, and the little cracks and tears in the wings. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with dry brushing, you want a dry brush. You want to wipe off the excess paint on a tissue paper like so. And basically, if you've ever seen like a crime movie or anything like that where they've got like forensic experts, you're basically dusting for fingerprints. You just want what's remaining on the brush to just sort of hit the edges and not go deep down into the crevices like you would a layer brush. You're just trying to glide it across the edges and avoid the cracks and crevices, and it's just going to pick up those raised areas. So get these values in here, and I feel like I want the edge of the wing to be darker, so I want to go a little bit brighter up in here, and I may end up washing that with like maybe like a soft purple or something like that to make it sort of look like there's like blood coursing through these folds of skin. Because I mean, it is presumably some form of mammal. It is a magical, and we haven't talked about what a Manticore is. I honestly don't know. Some sort of mythical beast, but I assume it has blood, and therefore there's going to be blood in the wings, and so I want to sort of remind myself of that by colorizing these wings, because these wings are supposed to be thin membranes of skin, so presumably you would see the flesh, and also obviously you see the veins as I'm dry brushing this on. So I'm gonna finish up these wings, and we will move on to, I figure I'll do the mane next, because this is still not as white as actually, you know what, I'm gonna do the face. I'm gonna wash the face and get that value in there before I move to the wings, or I move to the mane, I should say. And yeah, we'll see how that goes. So I'll finish up the wings and get right back. Alright, dry brush is all on. You can see that, the raised areas. I went a little bit heavy in some areas because I knew I was about to wash it with some other color, a darker color, to fill in those cracks again. So it's just mostly to get rid of the saturated blue. So now I'm going to combine that with this Shyish Purple, another contrast paint. This one, just because I want to leave the raised areas alone, I'm going to be using this mostly as just sort of a glaze. So I'm going to use a heavy amount of Lamian Medium on this one, especially because the Shyish Purple is a very dark, very pigmented paint. So hopefully this doesn't stain it too much. Let's see. Oh, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so the blue is picking up this purple really nice, using it as an underlayer. Another reason why I'm doing this is because when you do use a dry brush technique, it tends to leave the area that you dry brushed very dusty looking. Hence, I mean, due to, you know, the paint being dry, it's going to leave like a powdery coating. And so if you just add like a very thin wash, or even just sometimes just a little bit of water afterwards, like clean water I should say, that can get rid of that powdery look to it, and it'll blend in those colors as well. But I like using Lamy and medium more than water, because water can sometimes mix with the dust that's left over and turn it into sort of like a paint paste, if you will, and basically reactivate the pigment and just undo sort of what you had achieved with the dry brushing in the first place. So Lamy and medium will help blend that in a little bit better, and so I definitely recommend that over just straight up water. So I've almost got the tops of these wings done, and then I'll work on the bottom of the wing and finish that up. And then, as I said, I want to put some detail in the face here, because that's about the only thing that's not gotten some color, and then we'll go from there. So the wings are still drying a bit, so I'm going to move on to the face for now. I'm actually going to give the flesh wash that came with the kit a try, and I've discovered after opening it that you definitely need to shake these paints, because it looks like some of the sediment or pigment or whatever has definitely collected at the top of the lid, and it's, in particular with the washes, they're not very wash-like, they're actually kind of thick. So we're gonna see how this does. Obviously I'm gonna mix in some Lamy medium at first, just because I don't have any confidence in these paints, because even though they're Vallejo paints, which I have a lot of confidence in, I've never actually played with this flesh wash, and it's obviously coming in one of these temporary bottles, so I'm gonna see how well that does. So got brush, just straight flesh wash. I'm not gonna mix it with any other paints. I'm gonna just apply it to the face with some Lamy medium, see how that does. It's actually doing pretty well. So, as awkward as this may look, the Manticore, as with the Manticore of mythology, has a humanoid face, or a very human looking face, an angry human looking face, and this is no exception. It is really weird on a lion's body. I don't know if I'm going to keep the flesh tone as is, but for now I wanted to get it on here so that I could see just all of the details of the face. I'm not worried about getting the teeth or the eyes or the inside of the mouth just yet. I definitely want to make sure I don't get it on the mane. Just gonna move it around. I am gonna put a heavy amount inside the mouth, just because a black or a red mouth is what a lot of less experienced painters go for, and it's not very natural looking, just FYI, but this probably isn't either, but it's a step in the right direction, because your mouth does have a lot of fleshy color to it, whether you look inside there or not. So, alright, so that's applied. Very creepy looking face right there. So I want this, since it is a wash, just like the contrast, I want it to dry with gravity. So I want to make sure that I'm not letting it dry like this while I'm painting other areas. Definitely want the paint to settle downward, and you can see it starting to settle under the chin, under the lips, in there. And I didn't apply a lot, so this pooling is not going to be all that bad. I don't mind pooling in some circumstances. Just so you know, acrylic paint does shrink as it dries, and we are dealing with acrylic paint here, so even if there is some pooling, it'll probably shrink up in there to where it won't matter too much. Obviously, if it was a bigger pool, I'd probably do something about it, but I'm gonna leave that alone for now. And let's see, I'm now going to work on the coat and try to blend this in more. Figure out which color will probably work best for that, because I would like to dry brush the mane and make that a little whiter, but I want this flesh tone to dry, so I'm going to leave that alone for now, and I'm probably going to work on the lion coat itself. So we'll figure out what color that is and I'll be right back. So I did a quick test here, and I've decided that I really like how the heavy sienna and Tallarn sand work together, so I'm gonna blend those two together and use that as a dry brush. I'm gonna start with the darker areas of the haunches, and again I'm just gonna do it like dusting for fingerprints, just blending it in. So what I'm gonna do is I've decided that the darker portion of the lion manticore body is going to be darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. So even if I move it down here, it's just going to get lighter down here anyway. So it doesn't matter if I blend it downward, so long as I'm getting an even distribution between where I made these two colors meet, because I'm really just wanting to unify those colors and also heighten the shadows. I finished blending in the coat, and I even dry brushed the lion's mane, but I kind of lost some of the color in the legs, particularly the front legs, so I'm actually going to wash that back in with some Seraphim Sepia. So part of this process is mostly to encourage anyone. Obviously, I've gone with a different scheme than they intended with the paints that they gave, so this is also just to let you guys understand that you don't have to stick with what is prescribed in books or whatever. Just go with what you feel like, what you think looks good. And I don't know, I think he's looking all right. Still not a fan of that human face on a lion, but oh well, I guess that's just what a manticore is. So let's see, let me get the paints out and I'll work on those spikes. So I actually decided against the Leviathan blue. I'm gonna go with the Wildwood contrast paint. Just because I want to leave the blue for the wings, and kind of want these spikes to have a bony feel to them. So I want to stick with the Wildwood's just going to give it a dark bone sort of look, but it's not going to have that blue hue. So I've swapped to a smaller brush, and this is where the contrast paint really shines. You just gotta find the spikes, just one quick layer, and it's going to coat the whole thing, and then it'll give it some shading definition as it dries, because it's just going to meander down to the bottom of the spike there. So just pick out all these, and while I'm at it, I'm gonna, since I want these to be bone spikes, I'm gonna add a little bit of Lamy Medium, help it run down a little more. I'm gonna get these spikes as well. Alright, now that all the spikes are picked out, I went ahead and shaded the tail spikes as well, and I did a second wash on his face just so that I can brighten it up in a second. But as I mentioned earlier with the tail spikes, I wanted it to look a little like poison, so I'm going to use the Plague Bearer flesh, and I'm going to mix that with, actually, let's try this new Tesseract Glow paint that just came out from Citadel. I'm going to grab the two of those and mix them together. So I don't want to cross-contaminate, so I'm going to grab the Plague Bearer first. Brush it off, and grab a little bit of the Tesseract Glow. I'm probably wanting more Plague Bearer than Tesseract, so. Alright, so got that. And I'm just going to go all along these spikes, just make them look like they're just dripping with poison here. So for the face, I am going to go with the, what was this again? The Cadian Flesh Tone. The cadmium skin that comes with the kit, it's a little bit bright compared to Cadian Flesh. So I'm going to start with the Cadian Flesh and see if I need it to go brighter. Probably won't. But if I do, I can always mix in the Cadian Flesh. But basically what I want to do is I just want to touch on all of the areas. I'm actually not wanting his face to be all that bright because I want the brightest area to be that lion mane that I already highlighted. So I'm just going to pick out the areas that were left behind by the shading from the flesh wash here. And I'm only going to touch the stuff that's raised, but also the stuff that's on the top area. Like, I don't want to touch the underside of his cheek here because that's where the shadow is going to stay. So I just want to do the top portions of the skin here. Yeah, so looking at this, I think I do want to go a little brighter, but I'm not gonna bother getting out the cadmium skin that they provided. I've got a little bit of the bone white that they provided. I'm gonna mix that with the flesh tone here. A little more. Touch of water. Alright, so for this I just want to get just the brightest spots, just like the top of the nose here, highlight the cheek areas, and I don't want to cover as much of the same surface area as I did with the flesh tone on the first pass. I just want to get these, like the inner areas of that. So let's see, get this in here, and should it matter to anyone, I am using a 00 brush. This one is in fact a ghost brush that is sold at Imperial Outpost. You can find it at the counter. I believe it would also be classified as a fine detail brush or a spotter brush. And that's usually what's better for these kinds of details. And there's my completed Manticore. I know it got a little long, but I hope you had fun watching, and I can't wait to see what you guys can come up with, and see you guys at the shop. Take care.